Right this way, sir, she whispered, leading them to the best table in the house. The one that was always reserved, always waiting. Even though Jinwoo never called ahead. He didn't need to. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew what he could do. Jinwoo settled into his chair with the ease of a king on his throne, his cold eyes scanning the restaurant. Couples leaned close over candlelit tables, their laughter soft and intimate. Business executives clinked glasses in the corner booth. And there, weaving between tables with a tray balanced perfectly on her palm, was someone he'd never seen before. She was a black woman, tall and graceful, her natural hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She moved with quiet confidence, her posture straight, her smile professional but warm as she served an elderly couple near the window. Something about the way she carried herself caught his attention. There was no nervousness, no submission in her movements. "Who was that?" Jinwoo asked, nodding toward her. His second-in-command, Taemin, followed his gaze. "New server. Started last month. American, I think." Jinwoo's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "American," he repeated, settling back in his chair. "This should be entertaining." Before we continue with this story, if you're enjoying it so far, please hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and create more content like this for you guys. Your support means everything. Now, let's get back to the story. The woman approached their table, her order pad in hand. Up close, Jinwoo could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the set of her jaw that spoke of determination. She was beautiful, he supposed, but that wasn't what interested him. What interested him was that she looked at him the same way she'd looked at every other customer, with simple professional courtesy. No fear, no recognition of his power. That would change. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said in Korean, her accent clearly foreign but her words clear. "My name is Jada, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with some drinks?" Jinwoo leaned back in his chair, exchanging glances with his men. Then he switched to rapid Korean, his Busan dialect thick and deliberate, his words tumbling out in street slang he knew no foreigner could possibly understand. "Look at this one," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Does she think speaking a few words of Korean makes her belong here? Probably learned it from some drama." His men chuckled nervously, their eyes darting between their boss and the woman. "I bet she can't even read the menu. Why do they let people like her work in places like this? This isn't some American fast food restaurant." He gestured dismissively at Jada, switching to even cruder language. "Bring us soju. The expensive one. And try not to drop it. I'm sure you're not used to handling anything of quality." His men laughed louder now, emboldened by his performance. Jada stood perfectly still throughout his entire speech. Her expression didn't change. Her posture didn't shift. She simply watched him, her dark eyes steady and unblinking, as he finished his performance. The silence that followed stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Then she spoke. "Your order will be ready shortly," she said in flawless Korean, her Busan accent even cleaner and more refined than his own. "And for your information, I understood every single word. My Korean professor at Busan National University would be disappointed in your grammar. You used the wrong particles in at least 3 sentences. But I'm sure your mother would be far more disappointed in your manners." She paused, her head tilting slightly as she looked directly into Jinwoo's eyes. "The expensive soju you requested? That's the Wayo 41. I'll bring it right out. And don't worry, in my 2 years of serving in Busan's finest restaurants, I've never dropped a bottle, even ones of quality." The air at the table turned to ice. Jinwoo's men sat frozen, their faces drained of color. No one breathed. No one moved. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away, leaving only the thundering of 5 racing hearts. Jinwoo stared at Jada, his mouth slightly open, his usual mask of cold control completely shattered. Shock rolled through him in waves. Not anger, not rage, but pure, undiluted surprise. In 15 years of ruling Seoul's underworld with an iron fist, no one had ever spoken to him like this. Not his enemies. Not the police. Not even his own father before he died. Jada held his gaze for another moment, then turned on her heel and walked away, her head high, her steps measured and confident. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. She simply left them sitting there in stunned silence. "Boss," Taemin finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "Boss, should we?" "Shut up," Jinwoo said softly, his eyes still locked on Jada's retreating form as she disappeared into the kitchen. His hand, resting on the table, had curled into a fist, but not from anger. He was trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand the strange cocktail of emotions churning in his chest. He should be furious. He should be planning retribution. His reputation demanded it. His position required it. But all he could think about was the way she'd stood there, fearless and dignified, and cut him down to size with nothing but the truth. "Who does she think she is?" one of his men muttered. Jinwoo turned to look at him, and the man immediately fell silent, shrinking back in his seat. "Someone," Jinwoo said quietly, "who just did something none of you have ever had the courage to do." Jada returned minutes later with their soju, setting the bottle and glasses on the table with the same professional efficiency she'd shown before. Her hands were steady. Her expression was neutral. She poured their drinks with perfect form, then stepped back. "Is there anything else I can get for you gentlemen?" she asked in Korean, her tone polite but not subservient. Jinwoo looked up at her, really looked at her, and saw something in her eyes that he'd never encountered before. Not defiance exactly, but an unshakable sense of self-worth. She wasn't trying to challenge him. She simply refused to be diminished by him. "No," he heard himself say. "That will be all." Jada nodded once and walked away to tend to her other tables. Jinwoo watched her go, watched the way she smiled genuinely at the elderly couple, watched the way she patiently explained menu items to a young family, watched the way she moved through the world as if his power and his anger and his reputation meant absolutely nothing. His men sat in uncomfortable silence, waiting for an explosion that never came. They drank their soju quickly, desperate to leave, but Jinwoo barely touched his glass. He couldn't stop watching her. Every time she laughed at something a customer said, every time she gracefully balanced multiple plates, every time she passed their table without so much as a glance in his direction, something twisted in his chest. When the meal finally ended and they stood to leave, Jinwoo paused by the hostess stand. "The server," he said quietly. "Jada, how long has she worked here?" The hostess bowed nervously. 5 weeks, sir. She's one of our best, never late, never makes mistakes, customers love her." "Where is she from?" "America, sir. She's a graduate student at Seoul National University. International Relations, I believe." Jinwoo nodded slowly, processing this information. A graduate student. Educated. Fluent in Korean. And utterly unimpressed by him. As he walked to his car, Taemin ventured carefully. "Boss, what do you want us to do about her?" Jinwoo stopped, his hand on the car door. What did he want to do? The old Jinwoo would have had her fired, would have made her life difficult, would have reminded her that crossing him came with consequences. But that wasn't what he was feeling. What he was feeling was something he couldn't quite name. Something uncomfortable and unfamiliar that had nothing to do with anger. "Nothing," he said finally, sliding into the back seat. "Do nothing." As the car pulled away from the restaurant, Jinwoo looked back through the window. He could see Jada through the glass, laughing with a co-worker, completely unbothered by what had transpired. She'd already forgotten about him, moved on with her evening, dismissed him as easily as she might dismiss a rude comment from a drunk customer. And for some reason he couldn't explain, that bothered him more than anything. 3 days passed before Jinwoo returned to the restaurant. He told himself it was because the food was good, because the location was convenient, because he had business in the area. He didn't examine too closely why he'd specifically chosen a Thursday evening, the same day and time as his previous visit. Jada was there, of course, moving between tables with that same quiet grace. When the hostess tried to seat him in a different section, he waved her off and walked directly to a table in Jada's area. His men exchanged confused glances, but followed without question. When Jada approached, her expression didn't change. No surprise, no satisfaction, no nervousness. She simply pulled out her order pad and said, "Good evening. What can I get for you tonight?" Jinwoo opened his mouth, then closed it again. He'd prepared several things to say, ways to reassert his dominance or test her boundaries, but under her steady gaze, they all felt petty and small. "The galbi," he said finally, in Korean. "And the japchae." "Excellent choices," she replied, writing quickly. "Any drinks?" "Water is fine." She nodded and walked away. That was it. No reference to their previous encounter, no acknowledgement of who he was or what he could do. She treated him exactly like every other customer, and it was driving him insane. Throughout the meal, Jinwoo found himself watching her instead of eating. He watched how she helped an elderly man struggling to read the menu, patiently explaining each dish and making recommendations. He watched how she knelt beside a child's high chair, making faces that sent the little girl into peals of laughter. He watched how she moved with purpose and dignity, never rushed, never flustered. "Boss," Taemin said quietly, leaning close. "Are you feeling all right? You've barely touched your food." Jinwoo blinked, looking down at his plate as if surprised to find it there. "I'm fine," he muttered, but he wasn't fine. He was confused, unsettled in a way he hadn't been since he was a teenager struggling to survive on the streets. When Jada brought the check, Jinwoo did something he never did. "The meal was good," he said, the words feeling awkward in his mouth. Was he actually trying to make conversation with a waitress? "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Jada replied, her tone professional. "Have a good evening." She turned to leave, and Jinwoo heard himself say, "You speak Korean very well. Where did you learn?" Jada paused, turning back to face him. For a moment, he thought she might ignore the question, but then she said, "I taught English in Busan for 2 years after college. Lived with a Korean family. They taught me the language. I taught their kids English." Her eyes met his directly. "They also taught me that respect is earned, not demanded." It was a valuable lesson. With that, she walked away, leaving Jinwoo sitting there with the distinct impression that he'd just been put in his place again, so subtly that his men hadn't even noticed. He came back the next week, and the week after that. Each time, Jada treated him with the same polite professionalism. Nothing more, nothing less. She never brought up his initial behavior, never acted impressed by his presence, never showed any sign that she thought about him at all outside of taking his order and bringing his food. It was maddening. "Boss, I don't understand," Taemin said one evening as they left the restaurant. "Why do we keep coming here? You haven't even mentioned the deal with the Gwangju group, and they've been waiting for your answer for 2 weeks. Jinwoo didn't respond. How could he explain what he didn't understand himself? He only knew that something had shifted inside him that first night, and he couldn't seem to shift it back. 2 weeks after his first return visit, Jinwoo's driver was taking him through the Songbuk district, one of the poorer neighborhoods in his territory. It was early evening, the streetlights just beginning to flicker on, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. "Stop," Jinwoo said suddenly, leaning forward. "Boss?" the driver asked, confused. "Stop the car. Now." The car pulled to the curb, and Jinwoo stared through the tinted window at the scene unfolding on the sidewalk. There, crouched beside an elderly homeless woman, was Jada. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, completely different from her restaurant uniform. She held a steaming container of food, helping the old woman eat with careful, patient movements. Jinwoo watched, transfixed, as Jada set the food aside and listened intently while the woman spoke, her weathered hands gesturing animatedly. Jada laughed at something the woman said, a genuine, uninhibited sound that carried through the evening air. Then she did something that made Jinwoo's chest tighten inexplicably. She unwound the scarf from around her neck, a nice scarf that looked warm and expensive, and wrapped it carefully around the old woman's shoulders. The old woman protested, trying to give it back, but Jada shook her head firmly. Then she pulled something from her pocket. Money, Jinwoo realized, and pressed it into the woman's hand, closing the elderly fingers around it when she tried to refuse. But it was what happened next that struck Jinwoo like a physical blow. Jada hugged the old woman, not a quick, perfunctory embrace, but a real hug, the kind that said, "I see you. You matter. You're not invisible." The old woman's face crumpled, and she began to cry, and Jada just held her, right there on the dirty sidewalk, as if she had all the time in the world. "Boss," Taemin said from the front seat. "Should we?" "Be quiet," Jinwoo whispered, unable to look away. After several minutes, Jada helped the woman to her feet, gathered the empty food container, and squeezed her hand one more time before walking away. The old woman watched her go, touching the scarf around her neck with trembling fingers, something like hope on her weathered face. Jinwoo sat in the car long after Jada had disappeared around the corner. His mind was reeling, trying to reconcile what he'd just witnessed with the woman who'd stood in that restaurant and cut him down with surgical precision. She had steel, he'd seen that immediately, but she also had this softness, this profound compassion that she gave freely to a stranger on the street. "Who is she?" he murmured to himself. "Boss." Taemin turned in his seat, concerned. Jinwoo shook his head slowly. I've spent my entire life taking from people, building my empire on fear and desperation. And this woman, he trailed off, watching the spot where Jada had been. She spends her time giving to people who can never repay her, people who society has forgotten. Boss, she's just a bleeding heart. Probably makes herself feel good. No, Jean Woo interrupted sharply. You didn't see her face. That wasn't about feeling good. That was about seeing someone who was invisible and choosing to see them anyway. Something had cracked inside Jean Woo's chest, a fissure in the armor he'd built around himself over 15 years of surviving in a brutal world. For the first time and longer than he could remember, he felt something other than anger or cold calculation. He felt shame and longing and a desperate, aching curiosity about this woman who could be both warrior and saint. Drive, he said quietly. Where to, boss? I don't care. Just drive. As the car pulled away from the curb, Jean Woo made a decision. He needed to know Jada, not to conquer her, or possess her, or add her to his collection of things he controlled. He needed to understand how someone could exist in this harsh world and still maintain that kind of softness. He needed to know if that quality was something he'd lost forever, or if somewhere, buried deep beneath years of violence and moral compromise, he might still have access to it too. The next day, Jean Woo sent flowers to the restaurant. 24 white roses, expensive and elegant. When he arrived that evening, he saw them on the hostess stand, but Jada's section was empty of any flowers. Confused, he stayed through his meal, watching. As he was leaving, he saw Jada heading toward the door with the roses in her arms. He followed her outside, staying back, watching as she approached an elderly couple who'd just finished their meal. The old man was helping his wife into their worn jacket, and Jada stopped them with a gentle touch on the woman's arm. Excuse me, Jada said in Korean, holding out the roses. These were sent to me by someone today, but they're too beautiful to keep to myself. Would you accept them? You two remind me of my grandparents back home. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. Oh, we couldn't possibly. Please, Jada insisted, pressing the bouquet into the woman's hands. It would make me so happy. The couple accepted the flowers with trembling gratitude, and Jada watched them walk away, that same genuine smile on her face. Then she turned to go back inside and froze, finding Jean Woo standing 10 feet away, staring at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jada said calmly, if you sent those flowers, you wasted your money. I'm not interested in expensive gestures from men who use their power to make others feel small. I know, Jean Woo said, the admission surprising him as much as it seemed to surprise her. I'm beginning to realize that nothing I have, no money, no power, no threats, means anything to you. Then why keep trying? Jada asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Jean Woo searched for an answer, for words to explain the inexplicable pull he felt toward her. Because, he said finally, I saw you with that woman. The homeless woman in Songbuk. The way you treated her like she mattered. Jada's expression shifted, something guarded entering her eyes. Were you following me? No. I was passing by, but I couldn't look away. Jean Woo took a step closer. You spoke to me with steel, but with her, you were so gentle. How can one person be both? Jada studied him for a long moment, her arms crossed over her chest. Steel and softness aren't opposites, she said finally. You can be kind without being weak. You can stand up for yourself without tearing others down. The fact that you think those things are contradictory says more about you than it does about me. The words hit Jean Woo like a slap, but not an angry one. More like the kind that's meant to wake someone up. Teach me, he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Jada's eyebrows rose. Teach you what? How to be that. How to be strong and soft at the same time. Jean Woo ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I've spent 15 years building walls, becoming someone people fear. And now I look at you, and I wonder if I've lost something essential along the way. That's not something I can teach you, Jada said, but her voice had softened slightly. That's something you have to choose. Every single day, in every single interaction. She paused, seeming to debate with herself before adding. The man who walked into that restaurant 2 months ago, who tried to humiliate me for sport. I have no interest in knowing him. But the man standing in front of me right now, asking questions like he genuinely wants answers? That man might be worth a conversation. Then have a conversation with me, Jean Woo said. Please. Why should I? Jada challenged. Give me one good reason why I should give you my time when you've shown me nothing but arrogance and disrespect. Jinwoo opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he say? That he was powerful? She didn't care. That he was rich? She'd given away his expensive gifts. That he was feared? That seemed to be exactly what she didn't want. Finally, he said the only thing he had left, the truth. Because I don't know who I am anymore, he admitted, his voice rough. Because watching you with that woman made me realize I've become something I never wanted to be. Because for the first time in 15 years, I want to be better, and I don't know how. He met her eyes. Because you make me want to remember who I was before I became this. Jada was quiet for so long that Jinwoo thought she might just walk away. Then she sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. One coffee. That's all I'm offering. And if you show up with bodyguards or expensive cars or any of that power display nonsense, I'm walking away. When? Jinwoo asked, hope flickering in his chest. Saturday afternoon. 2 o'clock. There's a small cafe near Seoul National University, on the street behind the library. It's called Daisy's. Meet me there. She pointed at him. And Jinwoo? I'm giving you this chance because I believe people can change. But I've also seen enough of the world to know that most people don't. Don't make me regret this. She walked back into the restaurant, leaving Jinwoo standing alone on the sidewalk, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear or anger. The next 3 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jinwoo found himself distracted during meetings, snapping at his men for minor infractions, unable to focus on business that usually consumed his attention. Taemin noticed immediately. Boss, what's going on? He asked on Friday evening, after Jinwoo had dismissed an important weapons buyer without explanation. You've been off all week. I have a meeting tomorrow, Jinwoo said, staring out his office window at the Seoul skyline. A personal meeting. With who? Do you need security? No, Jinwoo said sharply, then softened his tone. No security. No men. No cars. I'm going alone. Taemin's eyes widened. Boss, you never go anywhere alone. It's not safe. I'm going to a coffee shop to meet someone, Jinwoo said, turning to face his second-in-command. I think I can handle that without an armed escort. Is this about that waitress? Taemin asked carefully. Boss, with all due respect, she's just a woman. There are plenty of women who would. She's not just anything, Jinwoo interrupted, his voice cold. And you'll speak about her with respect, or you won't speak about her at all. Understand? Taemin bowed quickly. Of course, boss. I apologize. Saturday arrived wrapped in autumn sunshine, the air crisp and clear. Jinwoo stood in front of his closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to wear. Everything he owned was either intimidating or ostentatious. Designer suits that cost more than most people made in a month, watches that could buy a car, shoes that screamed wealth and power. Finally, he dug into the back of his closet and found a pair of jeans he hadn't worn in years and a simple black sweater. No jewelry except a plain watch. No cologne. Just him. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. He looked ordinary, young, almost vulnerable. It terrified him. Daisy's cafe was exactly the kind of place Jinwoo never visited. Small, cozy, filled with university students typing on laptops and couples sharing desserts. No one looked up when he entered. No one recognized him. For the first time in over a decade, Jinwoo walked into a room and was completely invisible. Jada was already there, sitting at a corner table with a book open in front of her. She wore jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her hair in natural curls that framed her face. She looked up when he approached, and something that might have been approval flickered in her eyes. You came alone, she observed. You asked me to, Jinwoo replied, sliding into the seat across from her. Most men in your position wouldn't care what I asked. They do what makes them feel safe and powerful. She closed her book. The fact that you listened is interesting. A barista approached their table, a young woman with purple hair and a bright smile. What can I get you folks? Jinwoo started to order, but Jada interrupted gently. Could we have a few minutes to look at the menu? Of course, the barista chirped, walking away. Jinwoo stared at Jada. I was about to order. Without asking me what I wanted, Jada raised an eyebrow. That's lesson number 1, Jinwoo. Other people exist. Their preferences matter just as much as yours. Jinwoo felt heat rise in his cheeks. Was he actually embarrassed? I apologize. What would you like? The caramel latte, Jada said, a small smile playing at her lips. And maybe the blueberry scone. What about you? I'll have the same, Jinwoo said. realizing he had no idea what he actually liked in coffee shops because he'd never paid attention before. When the barista returned, Jada ordered for both of them, and Jinwoo found himself watching the easy way she interacted with the young woman, asking about her day, complimenting her hair color, making her laugh. It was such a small thing, but it was something Jinwoo had never done, treated service workers like actual human beings worthy of genuine interaction. After the barista left, Jada leaned back in her chair. So, tell me about yourself. And I don't mean the reputation or the business. I mean you. Who is Jinwoo when he's not being the scary crime boss? Jinwoo froze. No one had asked him that question in so long that he'd forgotten there might be an answer. I don't know, he admitted finally. I think I stopped being anything other than that a long time ago. That's sad, Jada said, but there was compassion in her voice, not pity. Everyone is more than just their job or their reputation. What did you like to do before? When you were young? Jinwoo thought back, pushing through years of violence and moral compromise to find the boy he'd been. I liked to cook, he said slowly, surprised by the memory. My grandmother taught me. We were poor, lived in a tiny apartment in Yeongdeungpo, but she could make anything taste amazing. She'd take me to the market, teach me how to pick the freshest vegetables, how to know when fruit was perfectly ripe. What happened to her? Jada asked gently. She died when I was 16. Cancer. We couldn't afford treatment. Jinwoo's jaw tightened. That's when everything changed. I was angry at the world, angry at our poverty, angry at my own helplessness. I made choices, bad choices. Each one led to another, and before I knew it, I was too deep to get out. You're not dead, Jinwoo, Jada said, leaning forward. As long as you're breathing, it's not too late to make different choices. Is it really that simple for you? Jinwoo asked, frustration bleeding into his voice. Just choose to be good, choose to be kind, choose to be better? No, Jada said firmly. It's not simple at all. It's the hardest thing in the world. Every single day, I wake up and choose not to become bitter about the racism I face, the discrimination, the assumptions people make about me. Every day, I choose to see the humanity in others, even when they don't see it in me. Every day, I choose compassion over anger, understanding over judgment. And some days I fail. But I wake up the next day and choose again. Their drinks arrived, and they sat in silence for a moment, sipping their lattes. Jinwoo was struck by how normal this felt, sitting in a cafe, having an actual conversation, being seen as a person rather than a position. Why are you really here? Jada asked suddenly. What do you want from me? Jinwoo set down his cup carefully. Honestly, I don't know. I just know that watching you live your life has made me question everything about mine. You have this light inside you. And I've been in darkness for so long that I'd forgotten light even existed. Jada's expression softened, but her eyes remained cautious. I can't be your redemption, Jinwoo. I can't fix you or save you or be the reason you become a better person. That has to come from inside you, or it won't last. I know, Jinwoo said quietly. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to show me that it's possible. That someone can exist in this world and still maintain their integrity, their kindness. Because right now, I don't believe it's possible for someone like me. Someone like you, Jada repeated. What does that mean? Someone who has done terrible things, Jinwoo said, meeting her eyes. I won't lie to you about who I've been or what I've done. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, built my empire on the suffering of others. Those are facts I can't change. No, you can't change the past, Jada agreed. But you can decide who you are from this moment forward. The question is, do you actually want to change, or do you just want to feel better about staying the same? The question hit Jinwoo hard because he didn't have an immediate answer. Did he want to change? Really change? That would mean giving up power, wealth, respect built on fear. It would mean facing consequences for his actions. It would mean becoming vulnerable in a world where vulnerability was often fatal. I don't know, he admitted, but I want to find out. Jada studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, then I'll tell you what I told my students when I was teaching in Busan. Change starts with 3 things: acknowledging the truth, accepting responsibility, and taking action. You can't skip any of those steps. What does that look like? Jinwoo asked, leaning forward. It means being honest about what you've done and why. Not making excuses, not blaming circumstances or other people. Just owning it. Jada broke off a piece of her scone. Then it means accepting that you're responsible for making things right, as much as you can. And finally, It means actually doing something different. Not just talking about change or feeling bad about the past, but making concrete, difficult choices that align with who you want to become. Jinwoo absorbed her words, feeling their weight. And if I do those things, if I really try to change, would you? Would you give me a chance to know you? Why does that matter to you? Jada asked. You barely know me. Because, Jinwoo struggled to find the words. Because when I look at you, I see proof that it's possible to be strong without being cruel. To stand up for yourself without destroying others. To live in this harsh world and still choose kindness. And I need to know how you do that. I need to understand it. Jada was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my grandmother used to tell me something when I was growing up in Atlanta. She'd say, baby girl, the world is going to try to harden your heart. It's going to throw so much pain and injustice at you that anger will seem like the only reasonable response. But hardness is easy. Anybody can build walls. It takes real strength to stay soft, to keep your heart open, to choose love even when you've been given every reason to choose hate. Your grandmother sounds wise, Jinwoo said. She was, Jada smiled sadly. She passed away 2 years ago. It's part of why I came to Korea. Needed to get away from the grief, find a new perspective. But I carry her words with me everywhere. I'm sorry for your loss, Jinwoo said, and meant it. They talked for 2 hours, their coffee growing cold as the afternoon sun shifted across the cafe floor. Jada told him about growing up in the American South, about the racism she'd faced, about deciding to study international relations because she wanted to build bridges between cultures. Jinwoo told her about his grandmother's tiny kitchen, about the street food market where he'd spent his childhood, about the moment he'd made his first terrible choice, and how each subsequent choice had been easier. You talk about it like it was inevitable, Jada observed. Like you had no control. Didn't I? Jinwoo asked. I was 16, alone, desperate. What else could I have done? I'm not saying you didn't face impossible circumstances, Jada said carefully. I'm saying that at some point, those circumstances became an excuse rather than a reason. There's a difference. Jinwoo wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he found he couldn't. She was right. Somewhere along the way, his tragic origin story had become a shield he hid behind, a justification for every terrible thing he'd done since. You're brutal when you want to be, he said, but there was no heat in it. I prefer honest, Jada replied. Sugarcoating the truth doesn't help anyone. As the cafe began to fill with the evening crowd, Jada glanced at her watch. I should go. I have studying to do. Can I see you again? Jinwoo asked, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. Jada considered this. Maybe, if you show me that you're serious about what we talked about. Acknowledging truth, accepting responsibility, taking action. Those aren't just nice words, Jinwoo. They require real sacrifice. What would that look like to you? Jinwoo asked. That's not for me to decide, Jada said, standing and gathering her things. You know what you've done. You know what needs to change. If you're serious about becoming someone different, you'll figure it out. Jinwoo stood as well. Thank you for giving me this chance. For being honest with me. Don't thank me yet, Jada said. The hard part hasn't even started. She walked away, leaving Jinwoo standing in the cafe, his mind racing. Around him, students laughed and studied, couples held hands, the barista called out orders. Normal life, happening all around him, a life he'd been absent from for so long he'd forgotten it existed. Over the next 2 weeks, Jinwoo began making changes. Small ones at first. He stopped berating his men for minor mistakes, started saying please and thank you to servers and staff. But those small changes revealed how deeply embedded his cruelty had become. Every instinct told him to dominate, to intimidate, to take what he wanted. Fighting against those instincts was exhausting. He returned to the restaurant twice, but Jada treated him with the same professional courtesy she showed everyone, nothing more. He didn't send gifts. He didn't ask for another meeting. He just existed in her presence, trying to be someone worthy of her time. Then came the evening that changed everything. Jinwoo was leaving a meeting with a corrupt city official when he saw her. Jada was 3 blocks away, crouched beside a young homeless man who couldn't have been more than 20. She was handing him a bag of food, but the man was refusing it, his body language defensive and ashamed. Jinwoo watched as Jada set the bag down and simply sat on the curb beside him, not pushing, not leaving, just being present. After a few minutes, the young man began to talk, his hands moving animatedly. Jada listened with complete attention, nodding occasionally, her face full of compassion. Then the young man started to cry. Jin Woo could see his shoulders shaking, see him covering his face with his hands. And Jada did what Jin Woo had seen her do with the elderly woman. She simply held him, right there on the dirty curb, as people walked past without stopping, without caring. Something inside Jin Woo cracked wider, a fissure becoming a chasm. He'd built his entire empire on the principle that weakness deserved punishment, that vulnerability was something to be exploited. But watching Jada hold this crying stranger, he realized she possessed a strength he'd never understood. The strength to witness pain without turning away, to offer comfort without expecting anything in return, to see dignity in people the world had discarded. When Jada finally stood, helping the young man to his feet and pressing the bag of food into his hands along with what looked like a business card, probably for a shelter or service organization, Jin Woo made a decision. He couldn't keep living the way he had been, not because Jada had asked him to change, but because he couldn't bear the person he'd become. The contrast between who he was and who she was had become too stark, too painful. He either had to change or accept that he was exactly the monster everyone believed him to be. That night, Jin Woo sat in his office until dawn, making a list. On one side, he wrote every illegal operation he controlled, every source of his power and wealth. On the other side, he wrote what it would cost to dismantle each one. The list was long and terrifying. His second-in-command found him there in the morning, still staring at the papers. "Boss, are you all right?" Jin Woo looked up at Taemin, really looked at him. The man had been loyal for 8 years, had followed orders without question, had helped Jin Woo build his empire. And Jin Woo realized he knew almost nothing about him as a person. "Taemin," Jin Woo said slowly. "Do you have family?" Taemin blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "A younger sister, boss. She's in university, studying to be a teacher. Does she know what you do?" "What we do?" Taemin shifted uncomfortably. "No, boss. She thinks I work in legitimate business. I send her money for school, tell her it's from investments." "Are you proud of the work we do?" Jin Woo asked. The question hung in the air between them. Finally, Taemin said quietly, "I'm grateful for the opportunities you've given me, boss. I'm grateful I can provide for my sister. But proud?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not proud." Jin Woo nodded slowly. "Neither am I. Not anymore." The next week, Jin Woo began the process of dismantling his empire. He started with the operations that caused the most direct harm, the human trafficking networks that moved desperate people across borders, the protection rackets that squeezed small business owners until they had nothing left, the loan sharking that trapped families in endless cycles of debt. Each decision cost him. His lieutenants questioned his judgment. Rivals sensed weakness and began encroaching on his territory. Money that had flowed like water began to dry up. But Jin Woo kept going, driven by the image of Jada sitting on that curb, holding a stranger while the world walked by. He didn't tell her what he was doing. He didn't ask for recognition or praise. He simply made the changes because they needed to be made, because he couldn't look at himself in the mirror otherwise. But Jada noticed anyway. 3 weeks after their coffee shop meeting, she approached him at the restaurant. It was late, near closing time, and Jin Woo had been sitting alone, nursing a cup of tea he didn't really want, just hoping to see her. "Walk with me," she said simply, untying her apron. They walked through the quiet streets of Gangnam, the neon lights painting everything in shades of pink and blue. For several blocks, neither spoke. Then Jada said, "I heard you shut down the trafficking operation in Itaewon and the protection racket in Hongdae." Jin Woo glanced at her, surprised. "How did you?" "I volunteer at a women's shelter," Jada explained. The director mentioned that suddenly, the girls being brought in from that network just stopped coming. She was confused. "I had a feeling it might be connected to you." "I'm not looking for credit," Jin Woo said quickly. "I know," Jada replied. "That's why I'm bringing it up. If you were doing this to impress me, you would have told me yourself. The fact that you didn't." She paused, looking up at the night sky. "It means maybe you're actually serious about changing." "It's harder than I expected," Jin Woo admitted. "My own men are starting to question my leadership. I'm losing money, losing power. Everything I built over 15 years is crumbling." "Is that what you want?" Jada asked. "To hold on to power built on suffering?" "No," Jin Woo said firmly. "But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't terrifying. I don't know who I am without it." Jada stopped walking, turning to face him. "Then this is your chance to find out. To build an identity based on something other than fear and control. Will you help me?" Jinwoo asked, the vulnerability in his voice surprising even himself. I can't do it for you, Jada said. But I can walk alongside you. If you're willing to keep being honest, keep making hard choices, keep showing up as someone different than who you were, then yes, I'll walk with you. Something in Jinwoo's chest loosened, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding. I'd like that. They started meeting regularly after that. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks along the Han River, sometimes just sitting in parks while Jada studied and Jinwoo worked through the complicated process of legitimizing his businesses. She introduced him to her world, the shelters where she volunteered, the community centers where she taught English to immigrant children, the quiet cafes where students and artists gathered. Jinwoo found himself learning how to exist in spaces where his reputation meant nothing. He learned to help Jada set up chairs for her English classes, to read picture books to children who giggled at his serious expressions, to serve food at the shelter without expecting gratitude or deference. You're good with the kids, Jada observed one afternoon, watching Jinwoo patiently explain English pronunciation to a frustrated 10-year-old from the Philippines. My grandmother taught me patience, Jinwoo said, helping the child sound out a difficult word. I'd forgotten, but it's coming back. One evening, as they walked through the street food market Jinwoo had shown her on their first date, he stopped at a stall selling tteokbokki. My grandmother's stall was 3 streets over, he said quietly. She'd stand here for 12 hours a day, her feet swelling, her back aching, just so we could eat. Tell me about her, Jada said, and Jinwoo did. He talked about the way his grandmother hummed while she cooked, about the stories she'd told him of growing up during the war, about how she'd never complained even when they had nothing. She would have liked you, Jinwoo said, surprising himself with the realization. She always said the measure of a person wasn't what they had, but what they gave. Sounds like she was a wise woman, Jada said, slipping her hand into his. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact, and Jinwoo's heart stuttered at the simple gesture. But not everything was peaceful. Jinwoo's decision to dismantle his empire had created enemies. Rivals who saw his changes as weakness began to move against him. His own lieutenants grew restless, some quietly defecting to other organizations. The threats escalated slowly at first. Graffiti on his properties, whispered warnings from informants, shipments that mysteriously disappeared. Jinwoo absorbed it all, refusing to retaliate with the violence that had once been his first response. Then they went after Jada. It started with photographs slipped under her apartment door. Pictures of her walking to class, shopping at the market, volunteering at the shelter. No words, just the images, a clear message that she was being watched. Jada brought them to Jinwoo, her expression calm, but her hands trembling slightly. Your world is following me, she said. I need you to be honest. Am I in danger? Jinwoo looked at the photographs, rage and fear warring in his chest. I'll handle this, he said, his voice tight. That's not what I asked, Jada said firmly. I asked if I'm in danger. Don't protect me from the truth. Yes, Jinwoo admitted, the word tasting like ash. My enemies see you as a weakness, a way to hurt me. I'll increase security, put men on you. No, Jada interrupted. I won't live like that. I won't be watched and guarded and turned into a prisoner because of your past. Then what do you want me to do? Jinwoo demanded, frustration bleeding through. Let them threaten you? Let them hurt you to get to me. I want you to make a choice, Jada said, her eyes blazing. Are you going to go back to being the man who solves problems with violence and intimidation? Or are you going to find another way? There is no other way, Jinwoo said. Not in this world. Then maybe it's time to leave that world behind completely, Jada said. You've been dismantling your empire piece by piece, but you're still holding onto the core of it. You're still the boss, still operating in that space. As long as you are, this will never end. You're asking me to give up everything, Jinwoo said. I'm asking you to choose, Jada corrected. Me or that life. Your future or your past. You can't have both. The argument ended with Jada walking away, leaving Jinwoo standing alone in her apartment, the photographs scattered at his feet. For 3 days, he didn't contact her, didn't know what to say. He went back to his office, to his men, to the familiar rhythms of his old life. But it felt hollow now. Every order he gave, every decision he made, he heard Jada's voice asking him who he wanted to be. His men noticed his distraction, exchanged worried glances when he stared out windows instead of focusing on business. On the 4th day, Tae-min came to his office with news. Boss, we've identified who's threatening the girl. It's the Gwangju group. They're trying to force your hand, make you retaliate so they can justify a full-scale war. Jinwoo nodded slowly. The old Jinwoo would have already planned the attack, would have struck hard and fast, would have made an example that no one would forget. The man he was becoming didn't know what to do. What are your orders, boss? Taemin asked. Jinwoo looked at his second-in-command. This man who had followed him for 8 years, who had a sister studying to be a teacher, who had admitted he wasn't proud of the work they did. What would you do, he asked, if it was your sister being threatened? Taemin blinked, surprised. Boss, I'm serious. If it was her, what would you do? Taemin was quiet for a long moment. I'd want to protect her, but I'd also want her to be proud of me. And she couldn't be proud of me if I solved the problem the way we usually solve problems. Jinwoo nodded slowly. I'm going to the prosecutors, he said finally. I'm going to tell them everything. About the Gwangju group, about our operations, about all of it. I'm going to cooperate fully, help them build cases, testify if needed. Boss, that's... Taemin stopped, his face pale. That's suicide. They'll never stop coming after you. And prison. I know, Jinwoo said calmly. But it's the only way to really end this. To protect Jada. To actually become someone different instead of just pretending. He looked at Taemin directly. I'm giving you a choice too. You can walk away now, go legitimate before any of this touches you. Use the money you've saved to make sure your sister finishes school. Or you can stay and face the consequences with me. Taemin stood silent for a long moment, processing. Then he said quietly, my sister wants to be a teacher. She wants to help kids learn, to make the world better. How can I tell her to follow her dreams if I'm not brave enough to follow mine? What's your dream? Jinwoo asked. Not this, Taemin said, gesturing around the office. I wanted to open a restaurant once. Before all of this. Cook food that made people happy. He laughed bitterly. Sounds stupid now. It sounds honest, Jinwoo said. And honest is the only thing worth being anymore. Batch 6, 1500 words. 2 days later, Jinwoo walked into the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's office alone. No bodyguards, no lawyers yet. Just him and a USB drive containing 15 years of carefully documented crimes. The prosecutor who met with him was a woman in her 40s named Kim Min-young, her expression skeptical as she listened to his opening statement. Let me understand this correctly, she said, leaning back in her chair. You're volunteering to provide evidence against yourself and your entire organization? Why? Because I want to stop being the person I've been, Jinwoo said simply. And because someone I care about is in danger because of my past. The only way to truly protect her is to end this completely. Prosecutor Kim studied him carefully. You understand that cooperation doesn't mean immunity. You'll face charges. Prison time. I understand, Jinwoo said. I'm not asking for a deal. I'm asking for a chance to make things right, as much as anyone can. The meeting lasted 6 hours. Jinwoo laid out his entire empire. The legitimate businesses that fronted illegal operations, the corrupt officials on his payroll, the network of violence and coercion that had made him untouchable for so long. With each revelation, he felt lighter, as if he was setting down weights he'd been carrying for years. When it was finally over, Prosecutor Kim looked at him with something that might have been respect. This is going to create chaos, she said. Multiple investigations, dozens of arrests. You've just blown open half the organized crime in Seoul. I know, Jinwoo said, but it needs to happen. He left the prosecutor's office as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his men, his associates, people who'd already heard whispers of what he'd done. He ignored them all and went to the one place he needed to be. Jada's apartment building was quiet when he arrived. He stood outside for a long moment, gathering courage, before pressing her buzzer. Yes? Her voice crackled through the speaker. It's me, Jinwoo said. I need to talk to you. A long pause. Then, come up. She opened the door before he could knock, her expression guarded. Jinwoo, I told you I needed space. I went to the prosecutors today, he interrupted. I told them everything. About my organization, my crimes, the people threatening you. All of it. Jada's eyes widened. What? Jinwoo, do you understand what that means? Yes, he said quietly. It means I'll probably go to prison. It means I'm giving up everything I built. It means I'm making a lot of very dangerous people very angry. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. But it also means I'm choosing. You asked me to decide between my past and my future. Between that life and the possibility of becoming someone better. I'm choosing. This isn't about me, Jada said firmly. I don't want to be the reason you. You're not the reason, Jean Wu interrupted. You're the catalyst. You showed me that there was another way to live, another way to be strong. But the choice to change, the decision to face consequences for my actions, that's mine. I'm doing this because I can't be that person anymore. Because when I look in the mirror, I want to see someone my grandmother would recognize. Jada's eyes filled with tears. Do you know what you're risking? They could kill you. Your own people could kill you. I know, Jean Wu said. But I'd rather die trying to be someone worth knowing than live as someone I'm ashamed of. Jada pulled him into her apartment, closing the door behind them. For a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other. Then she said, I didn't fall in love with you so you could protect me like a possession. Jean Wu's heart stopped. You what? I fell in love with you, Jada repeated, tears streaming down her face now. Because I saw someone capable of change. Someone brave enough to admit they were wrong and strong enough to make it right. But Jean Wu, this is going to be hard. Harder than anything you've faced before. I know, Jean Wu said, reaching up to wipe away her tears with trembling fingers. But I'd rather face it honestly than hide from it. And I'd rather face it knowing that somewhere, someone believes I can be better. Jada kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and full of hope and fear all tangled together. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. You're going to need a good lawyer, she said practically. And protection. And, Jada, Jean Wu interrupted gently. I know you want to help, but this is my consequence to face. What I need from you isn't to save me or fix this. I need you to just be there. Remind me why I'm doing this. Show me that becoming better is possible. I can do that, Jada whispered. But I'm scared. So am I, Jean Wu admitted. I've never been more terrified in my life. But I'm also more certain than I've ever been that this is right. The next 6 months were a blur of investigations, depositions, and legal proceedings. Jean Wu cooperated fully with authorities, providing evidence that led to the arrest of corrupt officials, rival gang members, and several of his own former associates. The media had a field day. Crime boss turns informant screamed the headlines, alongside speculation about his motives and predictions about his future. Through it all, Jada was there. Not every day, not even every week. She had her own life, her studies, her volunteer work. But she came to court when she could, sat in the gallery during his testimony, reminded him with her presence that there was life beyond these walls, beyond these consequences. Taemin had made his own choice. He'd cooperated with prosecutors, provided his own testimony, and used the money he'd saved to enroll in culinary school. My sister cried when I told her the truth. He confided to Jean Wu during one of their brief meetings. But then she hugged me and said she was proud I was finally choosing something real. The Guangzhou group had tried to retaliate, but with most of Jean Wu's former empire dismantled and law enforcement attention focused on organized crime, their